Ever since Joan of Arc Prime came into Rise of Kingdoms, it has been clear that she is a dominant cavalry commander, and one of her most dominant cavalry pairings is Alexander Nevsky, with Nevsky serving as the primary. But how should you set this march up in terms of its talents, and does it need that Horn of Fury accessory given that Joan adds extra rage with her first skill? Well, we busted out the Rage Simulator to test every possible scenario to give you the answers, so stick around. What's up, everybody? Psych out here with another Rise of Kingdoms video. I've done a lot of videos about Joan of Arc Prime and different things that you can do with her, different kind of pairings for her talent setup, all of those kinds of things. And I'll leave some cards at the top for you if you want to check those out. But in this video, I want to talk very specifically about a question that was asked to me on one of the Discord chats one evening. This actually came from Bunny himself. He said, I wonder if you need to have the Horn of Fury on a march with Joan of Arc, particularly Nevsky Joan of Arc. We really were thinking about this in rally scenarios because Joan of Arc Prime has this extra rage on this first skill, and that rage goes for 3 seconds, and it goes every time she casts her skill, which because of the force skill means she often gets to cast that multiple times. You can actually get quite a bit of rage, over 100 rage in 5 turns, because there's a little bit of overlap. It looks like it would be 120. Typically, it's about 100. You have to trust me on this. You can get that extra rage. And so the question is the Horn of Fury really worth it since you're picking up that extra rage from this skill? And so we busted out our friend, the Rage Simulator, and I'll leave a card at the top for the last time I used this Rage Simulator. I've used it on Saladin. I've used it on XY to set up XY's talent setup to sort of optimize the rage that we use so that we're not over raging. And of course, this really comes down to a simple question of optimizing our talents and optimizing the use of our accessories, because over raging, if you don't know, if this is some new concept to you, a limit that was shown to us by John Wick is that each commander can only, or each pairing, each march can only gain 220 rage per turn. No more than that ever, no matter what. It doesn't matter if you gain 260 rage. It doesn't matter if you gain 400 rage on a turn. If you had 400 rage and you got hit with Nebuchadnezzar's skill that reduces your rage by 100, it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is at the end of that turn, the most you could ever get was 220. And as I was saying, if you went over 220, you start at 220, and then commanders like Nebu, let me find Nebu's skill here. If his fourth skill here reduces your rage, you won't even get any of that extra rage that you earned. You'll actually be reduced to 120. So it doesn't matter how much rage you earn. The most you can get on any turn is 220, and it can be reduced below that. So the point here is we don't want to overrage too much. If we start putting tons of talents on rage and Horns of Fury, and we've got William, we've got all kinds of other things, Joan of Arc Prime and Trajan boosting our rage on the field, is that just too much rage? Are we overraging? Should we put those talents somewhere else in our build? Well, we used the Rage Simulator, and I did some work to code Joan of Arc Prime in there, and actually it took a little while, but nonetheless we got it all to work. I'll try to show that if I can find a screen clip. I'm running another simulation right now, so I can't actually show it right now because I'm also planning to do a video like this with XY coming up next. But the big deal here is that we got it to work with Joan of Arc Prime. We can now simulate her rage effects with any commander pair we want. We can do it in the primary position or in the secondary position. In this case, I'm focused on this march with Nevsky as the primary. So what I'm going to do now is jump over to the Excel spreadsheet where I've got all of the results saved. So give me one moment here. Let's go here and let me pop this up. Okay, so here we are on this Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of what's on here. So this is the result of 10,000 simulations of each, and each simulation was for 60 turns, right? 60 turns of battle, starting at turn 0 where you have no rage at all. And we did 10,000 for each of these setups. And so the first setup, and so you can see here, I did 48 total tests, 48 different setups. And this little description tells you what's going on. Here we're required to get 999 rage to activate our skill. Why is it 999 and not 1000? I don't really know, but Lilith has some kind of rounding that they do that actually 999 rage is all you need to proc that skill, even though it says 1000 is a rage requirement. I've actually tested that and shown it with Saladin. that there's some kind of rounding that goes on that actually ends up rounding 999 up to 1000, and you will actually trigger the skill, even though it feels like you should have to wait another turn. So we've set our requirement to 999. In this case, we have set talent 1, and I'm going to flip back over to the Rise of Kingdoms screen just to show you a little bit of what that talent looks like. Just one moment here. Yeah, so let's go over to Nevsky. So I'm talking about this talent right here, Burning Blood. I've set that to 9 points. No matter what, I'm saying we're maxing this skill every time. We're also maxing Rejuvenate every time. So I didn't test anything where there were no points in Rejuvenate. I didn't test anything where there were no points in Burning Blood. So those are both maxed in each of these cases. Jumping back over to the Excel sheet. So that's what we have. We've got 9 points there. Now I have set a whole bunch of cases, as you can see, where I haven't put any points in that other talent. And again, I'll flip back over to show you which talent I'm talking about. And that is this talent up here, Undying Fury. So in some cases, I might have a build. I think I might have set one up just for fun here. No, that's not it. Well, anyway, you could set up a build where there's no points in Undying Fury. It turns out those don't do very well, so I don't have any here to show. But we'll come back to that here in a moment. Okay, so in this case, we have no points in Undying Fury. We have 60 in Rejuvenate, like I said, and we have no points in Feral Nature. So we're not going all the way out into the skill tree. And we have a Horn of Fury on this march. So that's what this description says. You can see that I've done all of the possible combinations here. This next one, we do 20 in 1 point in Feral Nature for 20 rage gain, for 40 rage gain, 60, 80, right? All of the possible combinations of Feral Nature. And now we start adding points to talent number 2, that Burning Blood talent. And again, we do all the possible combinations of Feral Nature. Again, the same thing here where we have 6 points, so 6 total rage or 2 points in Burning Blood. And we repeat that over and over again until finally we have these builds where we have both of those talents maxed out. We have 60 in Rejuvenate. That is 3 points in Rejuvenate. We've got all of the combinations of Feral Nature, and we have Horn of Fury. And then finally, I did all of those 24 tests again, this time with no points in Horn of Fury. That is no Horn of Fury on the march. And the question, there's really 2 questions when we're talking about rage, maybe 3 questions when we're talking about rage with commanders. And I've got a whole bunch of data here that I'm going to walk you through. So the first 5 numbers here, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That is the turn in which the first skill was fired. So that's a really important question, I think, in Rise of Kingdoms is how fast do you fire your first skill? I refer to this as acceleration. That is, how fast do you get up to your top speed? Because every turn after that, if you have Rejuvenate, you're at a top speed. So that's your cycle speed. And so that's actually what's going to be listed in column I. The acceleration is the acceleration mean. That's the average out of those 10,000 trials. How often how quickly did they get to that first skill cycle, the firing of that first skill in these 10,000 trials, right? So averaged across all 10,000 trials with this setup, how fast did they get that first skill cycle? That's this acceleration. That's what's in column H. And in column I is the average after we get past that initial one, right? So now Rejuvenate's activating because we're activating our skills. And so that's sort of like we've reached top speed. How fast are we cycling each time after that? But each of these just is a distribution or just the percentage of times that we actually procced our skill on that turn, right? And so you can see that with this first setup, we never did it on turn 6. We never did it on turn 7. We did it almost 3% of the time on turn 8. We did it 42% of the time on turn 9. And most of the time, 55%, we did it on turn 10. And there were never any past that. We always did it by turn 10 with this setup. Now, you can see that these move around quite a bit as I move my mouse around here in terms of these different setups, how they're all functioning. So those are really the first 2 questions: is when did we fire off our first skill? That's captured by column H, and then column I is telling us how fast, how many seconds until we fired that skill again. And column J is the same information except this time it's the median. So what's the typical time in which we fired that skill again? Now, all of this other stuff over here, most of this has to do with hitting the rage cap. So this is what percentage of time we actually hit. We go over that 220% rage cap. This is how much total rage the march used. The march actually gained over those 60 seconds. This is how much rage it actually used. So you can see how much rage was actually wasted. This is how much rage we went over the cap on average in a 60-second cycle. And this is the mean, this is per turn. This is per turn. How much rage did we go over the cap typically per turn? And then this is how much rage did we go over the cap over the entire cycle. So The real actual numbers here aren't important. What's important to see is just sort of in general, how much are you over raging and how much of that might be wasted. But we'll come back to that here in a minute. A couple of things that I want to point out right away. So again, the first question concerned Horn of Fury. Do you want to have a Horn of Fury in this march? And in the past, I've done a lot of analysis on Horn of Fury, and I basically found it to be worth one turn. Typically, if you have a Horn of Fury on your march, you seem to average about firing off your skill one turn earlier. That is, your acceleration is one turn faster, and your cycle speed tends to be about one turn faster as well. And I've summarized all this data actually down here at the bottom. We can see the acceleration on average across all of the different iterations is about 8.93 when I have the Horn of Fury versus 9.74, a little less than one, but pretty close to 1 full second or 1 full turn faster with the Horn of Fury in acceleration when I go across all of these different builds. We can also look at it by skill cycle. That is how fast are the skill cycles on average once we get past the first one. Again, we see about a 0.73 difference. So in my view, that's a pretty big difference. We're much more likely to hit the 6-turn cycle with the Horn of Fury versus a 7-turn cycle without. And again, if you're thinking about a long battle where you're cycling, if you're a second delayed all the time and your opponent is always a second ahead of you, that really seems like a big deal to me. So the big picture here is it seems like very clear evidence right away. You definitely want a Horn of Fury on this march. Without the Horn of Fury, you are missing out on a lot. A couple of other things that I think are worth pointing out here, right? And so that's one of the things you can actually see if you just look at these median cycles, right? So the median cycle times around 7 at the most, right? And then so if we come down here, but a lot of 6s, right? A lot of 6s when we have the Horn of Fury. Down here, when we don't have the Horn of Fury, we see 7s and 7.5s, right? So that's what I mean by there's about the typical cycle is going to be about 1 second faster if you have that Horn of Fury on your march. To me, that's very conclusive evidence. If you're running Nevsky Joan, you really do want a Horn of Fury on that march. A couple of other things worth pointing out here. I think one of the questions is which talent build seems to be the best. And again, you can tell that these cycles up here at the top are a little slower. These are all ones where I have not maxed Burning Blood. Is that it? Burning Blood? Yeah, I think that's the talent in the cav tree. When we haven't maxed that one, our cycle is a little bit slower on average, our median cycle. And we get a lot faster when we start putting enough points in that, or we start adding points to Feral Nature in some cases. But I think the most consistent results are right here when we have 9 points in Burning Blood, and we have 9 points in Undying Fury. I forget which is which. Either way, both of the talents are maxed with 3 points each, so we're getting 9 rage from each one. So, and we also have Rejuvenate, and it really doesn't matter here if we have any points in Feral Nature. We're getting on an average a 6-second skill cycle. You can see there are some differences on average, the mean differences, or there's some small differences there, but the typical skill cycle is about 6 seconds if we have this build with any points in Feral Nature or no points in Feral Nature, and we have the Horn of Fury. One of the places where we see the Feral Nature make a difference here is on terms of our acceleration. We see that from no points in Feral Nature here, we have about an 8.9, almost a 9-second is our typical, right? You can actually see 81% of the time we fire on turn 9 if we have no points in Feral Nature. Whereas if we put 100 points, 5 total talent points, but we have 100 rage for Feral Nature, we actually fire off about 54% of the time on turn 9. So we're actually, and by that I mean we actually start firing off a lot faster, right? So we don't fire on turn 9 as often. In fact, we fire on turn 8 quite a bit more, almost 3 times as much. We fire off 1 turn earlier on turn 8 if we have 100 points in Feral Nature. Now, that doesn't mean that 100 points is the optimal setup for Feral Nature. If we look over here, we see that we actually overrage quite a bit when we have 100 points in Feral Nature. We do a little bit better if we take some points out of Feral Nature, but of course, we are costing ourselves in that first initial cycle. That is, our acceleration is getting a little bit worse when we don't use Feral Nature. So really, I think the question is, what is the optimal build? And so what I did was I actually said, okay, well, where are we getting the biggest gains from Feral Nature? And that's what this little chart shows over here. We're getting about a 0.14 second gain on average if we have just 1 point in Feral Nature. That is, we're getting 20 rage for Feral Nature rather than 0. That's a pretty big gain. That's the biggest shift that we see. But we also see a big shift at 3 points, which is kind of interesting. So if we get 60 out of feral nature rather than 40, we also see a big jump there. And if we look at the cycle shifts, the shifts in cycle time really aren't that big. So we're not really getting a lot of gain. And you can also see that here in the medians. They're all 6. You're probably going to fire on turn 6, no matter what. If you have a Horn of Fury, no matter how many points you put into feral nature. So you're not getting a lot of gains on the cycle shifts from feral nature, but you are getting some gains in terms of that acceleration shift. That is your first skill fire. Does seem to have a little bit higher probability if we put 3 points into feral nature, which I think is kind of interesting. You can see that we're not firing on turn 10 very often, but that's true for all of these builds. One of the big differences here between, say, no points in feral nature, we're at 81.81% versus 55.76%. So about 26% of the time, we are firing earlier than turn 9 than we would with the no point build. So about a third, maybe 30% of the time, that's maybe one way of thinking about something like that. We're actually firing off a little bit earlier. So to me, that seems to be, if you're going to put points in feral nature, I don't think you're getting a lot of gain by going out to 4 and 5. Now I'm going to switch back over to show a little bit of what I'm talking about on the actual setup. So you could see this is not the setup I'm using, but this is the setup that I was just talking about, where we're putting 3 points into feral nature. That seems to be the one that gives you the most bang for your buck. Now the question though is, what do you do with those points? It's really only the best place to put them is 2% attack. How much value are you getting out of 2% attack? I'm not sure you're getting a lot. So if you were somebody who said, look, I don't want to put those 2 points there, I'm just going to shove them all here, even though I know I'm not getting much value out of it, that would be okay too. I don't think you're going to be losing a lot like that. It does seem to me that this is perhaps the most optimal build for Nevsky with Joan in terms of how quickly you're going to accelerate to your maximum skill cycle speed, and then how fast is your skill cycle speed going to be, is one with 3 points here in feral nature. Now, there's some other builds we can look at, right? So another build might be one that doesn't use feral nature at all, right? We say, okay, forget about feral nature. What other points am I getting? And that's why this one I think deserves some consideration, because I am going to come all the way up here and get disarm, which gives some chance of reducing the enemy's attack. And we're also going to be increasing the health of our cavalry units by 1%. We're going to be able to pick up some points there. We're also going to get a little more march speed over here. So there are some advantages in terms of your stats and some of the other talents that you get by not coming out here to get feral nature. But if we go back to our spreadsheet and we look at what does that one look like, that one is actually test number 19 right here. So this is this one I was talking about, where we're going to be firing on turn 9 pretty often. That's going to be most typical for our first skill fire is here on turn 9 with the Horn of Fury, of course. But our cycle is going to be around 6.29, 6.3 seconds on average, or the typical cycle is going to be about 6 seconds with this march. The nice thing about this march is obviously we're not wasting a lot of rage because we're not putting any points into feral nature. So there's a lot of consistency in this march. You're never going to get those. You're just not going to get those early fires, right? The 7-turn fire is going to be pretty rare with this march. There's an argument to be made for saying, hey, I like disarm as a talent. I like those extra stat points. I like the extra march speed that I'm getting. So you could decide to go with that build with no points in feral nature. I think that's a perfectly reasonable way to go. An alternatively decent build would be to say, okay, I'm just going to put 1 point, maybe instead of that 1 point in health, maybe instead of one of the points in disarm, you're going to move that over to feral nature to get 1 point in feral nature, which actually has a pretty big impact. You're now 25% of the time firing on turn 8, as opposed to only 12%. So you're doubling the percentage of the time that you fire on turn 8. Or again, I think another optimal build, and in my view, perhaps the most optimal build, is putting 3 points in feral nature with this march to increase your chances of firing on turn 8 to 40%. And 95% of the time, you're going to be firing on turn 8 or turn 9, or even faster, sometimes even on turn 7, which is really, really cool. So yeah, I think that's really all I have to say about this march. I think it's one of the strongest cavalry marches in the game. Everybody, I think, has sort of recognized that so far. But I think this build here, this is the one I've been using. It's not the one I would recommend. I would actually recommend, and I'm going to shift over to this build here, I think, because it is the most optimal build for Nevsky with Joan of Arc if you have the Horn of Fury And I think the evidence here is pretty clear that the Horn of Fury is really a must-have on this march if you want it to be the most effective it can be on the battlefield. That's it for this video. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it helps you set up your Nevsky Joan of Arc march, if that's a march you're running in the open field in a really effective and productive way. If you learned something in this video, if you like this video, give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for coming by, everybody, and I will see you in the next one.